Good afternoon. In a dynamite editorial, Los Angeles Lakers legend and multiple award-winning columnist Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wrote, 50 years ago, Marvin Gaye sang in Inner City Blues, "Make me wanna holler, the way they do my life." And today, despite the impassioned speeches of well-meaning leaders, white and black, they want to silence our voice and steal our breath. Kareem, of course, as we know, is the all-time NBA leading scorer, a six-time NBA champion, and the league's only six-time MVP. He's also a recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom and the NBA's, as we said, all-time leading scorer. Kareem also is the author of 16 books, including most recently Mycroft and Sherlock, The Empty Birdcage. Today, we have the privilege of welcoming the great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Kareem, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And obviously we have also with us from the Los Angeles Sentinel, the editor Brandon Brooks. Brandon, thanks also for joining us. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure. My pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So Kareem, we're gonna jump right in. Your column was, as always, was amazing. I know you've won a number of awards. People think about your awards and they think basketball, but you've won it with the pen as well. Talking about the unrest, talking about the aftermath of the recent situation with George Floyd. Kareem, you've been on the front lines of protests yourself. Tell us about this one and what might be different here than what we're seeing today.
Well, I think what's different about this situation is that across America, people of all descriptions got an understanding of what it means to be a Black American and to be singled out and discriminated against. They saw what happened to Mr. Floyd, and he lost his life in that instance. But for so many Black Americans, it's just a daily grind of possible bad situations that you come across just because of the color of your skin. And people are starting to realize that and understand that it can't be tolerated.
Yeah, absolutely. And in your column, Kareem, you wrote some really fascinating, poignant truths about that. When you sat down to write that column, Kareem, what was going through your mind?
Well, first of all, when I saw the film, it's almost 9 minutes of horror, and I broke down and started crying. I did. I was out of it for a good half hour. Because you get to a point where you can't take any more of it. You just see it again and again and again and again and again and again, and it's just it's unbearable. But we have to have faith that there's some goodness in the other people in our country, and this time they got it, and I think a whole lot more people are getting it now and understand that change has to come. I think this might have woken up a political will to do something about this at this time, when so many other times nothing was done.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Brandon, feel free to jump in from Los Angeles. Los Angeles, of course, is where we know Kareem has shined. I mean, he shined in Milwaukee, but we love him for what he did in Los Angeles. We know that the Sentinel has some questions for the great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and we thank everyone for joining the Black Press's Fire Show today with the great legend Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Kareem.
Yeah.
Kareem.
Yes. I'll chime in briefly.
Please do.
Again, Kareem, again, thank you for your time in the Los Angeles Sentinel. We're obviously big fans of you for decades. Since you've been doing your work. I'm actually a native Angelino. I grew up in Inglewood, California, so right down the street from the Great Western Forum, and grew up idolizing you and Magic. And to be honest, the Lakers are the reason why I played basketball myself. And did try to at least play basketball. I don't know if I did quite what you did. We all know that, but again, you had an illustrious career, and thank you for your work. But I think today it's important to note your activism. I've just been a fan of the man you've been your entire life, even before making it to the NBA, and you've always been very conscious of you've interviewed Martin Luther King when you were a young student, and you've always just been on the front line of critical thinking. So I just want to thank you for that work, and just thank you for being the man you are, first and foremost.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think a good question I would be is, Stacey kind of touched on that. We have the civil rights movement of yesterday, and I think we're here today. And unfortunately, as many things that have changed, many things have not. How would you compare, somewhat today's movement with yesterday, but not to compare, how much more work needs to be done? I mean, that's kind of a loaded question. I mean, we know a lot, but you've been on the front lines of this topic of police brutality. You've been an advocate and someone that's been a staunch supporter of Colin Kaepernick when many people were not. So just getting your thoughts on police brutality, kind of yesterday, today, and just kind of the scope of where we are.
Well, I think we should deal with this by understanding that there's no difference between what's happening now and what has traditionally happened throughout our experience here in North America. Black Americans were singled out and discriminated against and oppressed. So there's a long tradition to that. And the means that they used to keep us in our place was violence, the threat of violence, the threat of lynching. So there's a long tradition of oppression, but there's also a long tradition of Americans waking up to the fact that that oppression is not right, and it can't endure. And I think that feeling now has taken root in our country, and it's a lot different now. I see it being a lot different with regard to the response from other Americans, and that gives me hope.
And Stacey, just one quick follow-up question. We hear this term of protesters versus looters, and it's kind of the line gets blurred at times, but we know that we're seeing hundreds of thousands of peaceful protesters around the world. Can you just speak on, even with Colin Kaepernick, is there a right way to protest? And at times, people, answer that question if you wouldn't mind. Is there a right or wrong way to protest?
There is a right way to protest. If we're going to talk to the rest of America, we have to talk logically. We can't just express our anger. People don't react well to anger. But if we can logically explain to them why they need to help us eliminate some very bad situations in America, they might listen. And we might win them over with the righteousness of our cause. And I think that that definitely was the feeling behind so many of the protests that have gone on and on. It's going around the world. People are protesting the death of Mr. George. Excuse me, Mr. Floyd. I think that was really a remarkable breakthrough, and it's going to have some positive results because of that. People can now understand what it's all about to be a Black American.
Yeah, Kareem, tomorrow we are going to have on the Attorney General from Minnesota, Keith Ellison, who's prosecuting the case out there. I wanted to ask you, when you heard the charges, the initial charges against the officer, third-degree murder, I think it was, and no charges at first against the other officers involved, what was your initial reaction? I know there was an outpouring of they have to bring stronger charges and they have to arrest the other cops, which eventually they did. What was your thoughts when that was happening?
Well, for me, it's kind of a two-way thing. My father and my grandfather were police officers, so I come from a law enforcement family. But the whole idea of law enforcement is you have to treat everybody the same way, and that was not the case here in America. So the people that got into this issue really picked the right time, where people had a clear example of how horrible it can be. I think that really got through to everybody, and I think we're dealing with a different landscape here now that people understand what it's about.
Yeah. Do you think it gave the protesters a sense of accomplishment or relief? I think that's a better word, that the other officers were charged.
Yeah, there's a relief that they were charged, and just that all the people involved were identified and sanctioned. The governor and mayor there in Minnesota, they got on it right away. They fired those officers, and made it so that the prosecution could proceed a lot quicker and have a lot more effect on what was going on, because they didn't waste any time coming up with charges and making sure that at least the officer who knelt on Mr. Floyd's neck, they got to him, and finally, they got the appropriate charges so that other cops can realize that when they do intervene, they'll be achieving something that is desirable.
Yeah, it's interesting too, Kareem, when we think about the fact that it was caught on camera, like a lot of things are today. Everyone's waving the cell phone cameras.
Mm-hmm.
But it brings up, though, so much has happened when there wasn't cameras, when the cameras are not on. Can you speak to that, Kareem?
Yeah, when the cameras weren't on, people took all of the negative stereotypes about Black Americans and believed them. They believed that Black Americans were prone to criminal activities and weren't very intelligent, and they might be able to sing and they might be good athletes, but they have to be disciplined, and they need to be subject to the ideals and attitudes that dominate our country. And finally, people are starting to realize that that's not the case. Those stereotypes are not valid. What Reverend Sharpton had to say, we could have learned everything that everyone else learns in America, but our schools were underfunded, and our children were looked upon as though they couldn't learn. This has been a common myth about Black Americans, and we've suffered for it. So a lot of these attitudes about Black Americans are based on stereotypes that have no validity, but people believe them and accepted the violence perpetrated against us because it seemed to fit the mold. Now they know that mold was a fiction. Black Americans are just like any other people. We can learn, we can obey the law, we can be a part of America just like any other American citizen.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Chiming in. Kareem, you've always been, as I said, an activist, and even though in the height of your career, and many will say that you've at times and even up to today, you may have not been given your proper just due. I mean, and it's arguably, and I'm a big fan of sports, and you're the all-time leading scorer in the NBA. You are arguably the greatest NBA player ever, but at times people don't put you in that bracket. You're hearing Jordan, you're hearing all these things. Can you speak on your activism and your legacy, and do you think that has hindered or taken away from your accolades, for lack of a better word?
Well, certainly. Look at what happened to Colin Kaepernick. Here's someone, a talented athlete, but they didn't like the fact that he was calling attention to something that they didn't want to talk about. The NFL did not want to talk about police brutality. They did not want to talk about Black people dying unnecessarily at the hands of white cops. That was a subject that Colin was calling attention to, that the NFL, they didn't want to get behind it. So they ostracized him, they blackballed him and denied him a job and denied him employment because they didn't like what he had to say. They didn't like what he was calling attention to. And now they're going to have to deal with it again. Just recently, this quarterback for the Saints said something that was totally off base. And the condemnation that came down on him immediately, it was remarkable. And he was talking about Colin Kaepernick's demonstrations, and the rest of the NFL, especially the black NFL players, they're not buying it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And first of all, I'll say I'm with you, Brandon. When they talk about the greatest, we probably need to do another Last Dance. Maybe we'll call it the First Dance with Kareem. With Kareem.
Exactly.
But Kareem, I don't want to ignore what our viewers are saying. Tyrone Vines writes that what are we going to do to resolve these issues facing people of color in America? What is the national strategy? He says, talk is cheap. We've been talking for decades. Now what?
Well, I would have to say we have to find the legal means to deal with bad cops. That would be a big step in the right direction. Having some way, some means that is legal and reliable to deal with cops that don't respect the rights of the people that they're supposed to protect and serve. That would go a long way to eliminating so many of these problems that are based with police officers who can't deal with the people that they're policing who don't look like them. We've got to get past that moment.
It's interesting because you mentioned having police officers in your family.
Yeah.
What's that like in this climate, Kareem? What are they saying? What have you been taught?
Well, hey, my dad gave me the talk. He said, you do the wrong thing, you could end up dead. He was very clear about that, and he told me he'd wear me out if I was not caught doing the wrong thing. I'm very thankful that my dad was part of my life, but so many people don't have that luxury. They come from one parent families, but I'm just happy that I got the talk, and I listened, and I was able to negotiate my way around a number of what could have been bad incidents. I remember being stopped on the New Jersey Turnpike a couple of times for no good reason. I wasn't speeding or anything, but I was able to stay calm and stay alive.
Yeah.
Kareem, you're one of the great minds, just in Black life, but obviously in the sports world over these last few decades. The Muhammad Ali's, the Jim Brown, and you were right there in these situations. What ultimately was your spark as a youngster that kind of got you on that playing field, even changing your name and just kind of being always open-minded? Was it your father? How did you develop that tenacity and just that thought-provoking, thinking throughout your life?
I think the first incident that made me want to know or try to understand what was going on was the murder of Emmett Till. I couldn't understand it. I was only 8 years old when it happened, and I asked my parents. My parents didn't have the words to explain it. So I started just watching the news. I'd watch the evening news, and I paid close attention to the civil rights movement starting at that moment when I was 8 years old. And I just wanted to understand it, and there's no understanding it. People do not like the other, no matter who that other is. Yeah. And that's a problem.
Yeah. And just to kind of fix on that same question, changing your name. I mean, it was so powerful, and we know, as Black Americans, we know, but just kind of share again with the public of how difficult that was, or maybe it wasn't difficult, of making that decision, back in that time. Because again, some people would say, don't do it. You're putting your career at risk.
Well, when I entered UCLA, I started questioning a lot of things, and I was aware of the history of the Catholic Church. I was raised Catholic, and the Catholic Church was involved in the slave trade. Wow. So at that point I couldn't be a very enthusiastic Catholic, and I started investigating other religions, and Islam seemed to make the most sense to me. I still have a strong belief in monotheism, and monotheism most practiced in West Africa, where my family originally came from, is Islam. So I gravitated toward Islam. It was just a natural gravitation. And it's funny, Muhammad Ali went through the Nation of Islam, but we both ended up being, Orthodox Muslims, and trying to hold on to what we understand as the true monotheistic faith.
And Kareem, the athletes today, especially LeBron James of late, I should say, with the George Floyd situation, you're hearing more athletes speak up. You mentioned Drew Brees earlier, but that was common practice with you, Muhammad Ali, guys like that. What role do you think celebrities should play in protest and civil unrest today?
Well, I think the Black athlete has a great track record in all of these things. You start with Jackie Robinson integrating professional baseball, and Bill Russell. The example he set for me was wonderful, because he was a firm supporter of the civil rights movement, but he wasn't out there making crazy, angry statements. His approach was dignified and focused, and I really learned a lot just by observing the guys that came before me. Bill Russell especially, Jim Brown, his economic focus enabled a lot of Black Americans to start thinking in terms of the general economy, rather than trying to hustle in our neighborhoods, that being the only economy open to us, the criminal economy. Black Americans have done very well coming outside of that and dealing with the national economy and taking our place.
Yeah. And Kareem, murder and death seems to be recurring drivers in galvanizing civil unrest, but injustice takes on many forms every single day. Do we need to be more vigilant in fighting against daily injustice?
Yeah, we need to be more vigilant, and we need to take an economic bend on this. We need to start trying to save the capital, the financial resources we need to do for the things that are important to us. A number of other communities have taken that path and done very well. So now it's time for Black Americans to really get into economic sophistication and economic literacy, and doing the right thing so that we can save and build the wealth of the Black community. That will go a long way to dealing with so many of the problems, our educational problems, our lack of adequate health care. All of these issues have a financial leg, and when we get a better idea of how to cope with that, we'll be doing a lot better.
Yeah. And I'll remain in moments with the great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I do want to ask you about Camp Skyhook. Oftentimes we talk about things. As the saying says, don't just talk about it, be about it. Kareem, right. You've been about it. Talk about Camp Skyhook, please.
Well, Camp Skyhook is my effort to get the young people in the LA Unified School District aware of where the good jobs are going to be in the 21st century. And that's with STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. So we send about 80 kids a week to a camp where in the Angeles National Forest, just outside the city, and they do hands-on STEM experiments, and they get an idea of where good jobs are. The people working at the hospital, how they got to their job, the people working down at the weather department, or the people working at the refinery, what their jobs are all about, and how science, technology, engineering, and math relate to that, so that they can start now planning to go to school and educate their way into a great job.
Yeah. And Kareem, for some fortunate person out there, if it's a special occasion, they might get a phone call, a video call from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Kareem, I know we didn't ask you on here to talk about anything commercial, but I gotta ask you about that.
Oh, it's called Iconogram, and I do messages for people who want me to help them celebrate. So you want me to send a message to your uncle who's having a birthday, an anniversary, your nephew who's having an education. You go to Skyhook. Pardon me, iconogram.com, and you just do what they tell you, and I can put together a congratulatory video. I can do birthdays, weddings, you name it, I'll do it. And it's it enables me to stay in contact with my fans and have a good moment with them. It's worked out pretty well.
Yeah, and one more before I.
Oh, go ahead. No problem.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Oh yeah, no, I was.
Yeah,
go ahead, please continue, Stacey. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to kick it over to you anyway, Brandon, but I have to ask Kareem. Other than Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who's the greatest basketball player ever?
That's impossible to say. I mean, if we can't get Oscar Robertson to play against Michael Jordan, we're not going to figure that out. If we can't get Elgin Baylor in the mix, how are we going to figure all of this out? It's impossible. If we can't get Wilt to play against Shaquille, how are we going to know how that would play out? It's impossible, and I think it's set up so that people can go to their favorite bar and order some wings and argue about it. That's really what this is all about, because we're never going to actually figure this out.
Yeah,
it's funny, Stacey. You went right at the kind of the sports questions I was thinking about. But look, for the sake of sports, commentating and people's opinion, do you have a top five? And if you do, can you share that and not excluding yourself if you're part of that?
Geez, it's so hard, man. And how do you compare LeBron James to Elgin Baylor? I can't.
Yeah, you're right.
They both weren't on the court at the same time, so we're not going to figure that particular one out. And it goes on. Karl Malone, incredible athlete. How come people don't try to figure him into the picture? It's a whole lot of people deserve to be mentioned in all of this, and it's kind of like a thing where you have to go by eras and stuff to really to get it, in proper perspective.
And I want to just kind of even again go back to when I initially spoke about your legacy and about how at times you don't get your proper due. Do you think about that while you're about how you're viewed with these conversations, or do you worry about it of being considered the greatest basketball player that ever lived?
I don't worry about that, because it's an impossible thing to know, and I don't think that it means that much. I've moved on, and it's great that sometimes I'm in the conversation, but it's impossible really to find out definitely. If you want to be scientific about it, you're out of luck.
Another quick question from me, Stacey. Can you speak on fatherhood? I know you have I believe a son, two sons, I think, and one is in the medical field. Can you just speak about being a father and the importance of education and instilling a legacy in your sons and to why they are who they are today?
Well, yeah, I'm really proud of my sons, because my oldest son wanted to play in the NBA, and he was a good college player, but he didn't have it to make it in the NBA. But he works for Kaiser here. He's an administrator and a counselor. And my middle son is a surgeon. But I just let them figure out what they wanted to do with their lives, and try to provide the educational foundation for that. And the most difficult part of it was getting my son, the surgeon, through med school and his residence. But once that was done, he went on and just took the reins and rode it all the way to the finish line. And I'm so proud of him.
Which means he's
Kareem,
on the front lines of this COVID-19 situation too. So his thoughts, you know, definitely in our prayers. So I just want to say thank you for his work, and
you're welcome.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, and thank you Kareem, for your work. One last question for you, Kareem. As I mentioned at the top of this, the Black Press of America will be speaking with Attorney General Ellison tomorrow out of Minnesota. Do you have any questions for the Attorney General that you'd like to ask him?
No, I don't. I think that you know, there's a lot of Supreme Court decisions that make it very difficult to hold police officers accountable, especially if they're going to try to avoid you know, the facts. So you know, he has a difficult task ahead of him. So I just wish him well. Attorney General Ellison is a good man, and I hope that he's successful in his prosecution of this case. It's a very important case.
Yeah, well, and Brandon Brooks of the Los Angeles Sentinel, in my opinion, we've been talking to the greatest NBA player ever to live. We appreciate your time. We appreciate all of the wise words. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, thank you so much. And we hope to do this again at some point.
It's great talking with you guys. Be well.
Yes,
you be well as well. Everyone stay safe.
All right. God bless. Thank you all.
Thank you.